Raising concerns at work can feel daunting and sometimes truly scary. Are you going to be labelled as difficult or as a whistleblower? And will it come back to bite you at a later date? The anxiety about potential repercussions are enough to raise your stress levels, let alone the thing that's actually going on. Obviously, if you have grave concerns about something going on at work, you need to report it. But what about those hundreds of things which aren't ideal, which could be done better or just feel a bit off? Does speaking up about these things raise or lower your stress levels? And whilst it may benefit the system, does it actually do you more harm than good? Attempting to address everything officially just might not be possible. And so this week, psychologist, lecturer and researcher Olga Landini joins me to talk about what she's learned from her research about speaking up in healthcare and how healthcare practitioners can do it in a way which makes us feel better and not more anxious. And if you're in a leadership role, Olga also has some great advice to help when someone needs to chat something through with you.
I'm Olga Landini. I'm a psychologist by training, and I'm currently a researcher at the postgraduate level at the University of Leeds in the School of Psychology. My interests are in burnout, voice and silence in UK healthcare workers, but also broadly in their well-being and how we relate to our jobs on a daily basis.
Great to have you on the podcast, Olga. I'm really interested in the research that you're doing at the moment. I know you got in touch with us because you thought people need to hear about this, and you have been looking into speaking up when you see issues at work, and you've got an interesting take on that in your research. Why do you think your research is really, really important for doctors to hear about right now?
Thanks, Rachel, and thank you for having me here. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about different things than what we usually read about speaking up and voice. Now, I don't want to imply that what we read out there is wrong, but as with everything in research, and especially in the social sciences, a lot is up for interpretation, and there is a lot of things that we can research in different ways and end up finding different results. So what I'm focused on is the experiences of speaking up and employee silence in UK healthcare workers. And just really briefly to explain a few definitions, we often talk in terms of voice and silence in my field. So employee voice would be any form of genuine expression of thoughts, feelings, evaluations about things at work to persons capable of change in that work environment. And then at the sort of lexical opposite would be employee silence. And that's where we have the withholding of those genuine expressions from persons capable of change or redress. So practically speaking, if I feel that in my unit we need to change the way we do something, if I hold that back from my manager who has the power to change that, I would be engaging in employee silence. And then if I go and I communicate this suggestion to my manager, who is the person capable of change in this case, then I'd be engaging in employee voice. And around the start of my PhD, I had the opportunity to interview healthcare workers in the UK from very different positions, porters, healthcare assistants, managers, senior consultants. And I got to see a very different picture of silence and voice than what until then a lot of the literature and a lot of the sort of promotional materials, if I can say that, were suggesting. So that simple speak up more and you'll have less burnout and patient safety will be better was not really working. And what was happening instead was that in environments where people felt speaking up was welcome and where suggestions and concerns were being heard and acted on, people were feeling happier, people had less burnout, people were feeling valued and acknowledged, and that potentially would have some effect on patient safety or the overall functioning of the unit or the team or the organization or the trust, rather than kind of suggesting that, you know, if you say everything that's on your mind all the time, we're going to have less problems. It's not really like that.
This is really fascinating. Where did that initial understanding come from? Because intuitively, speaking up is stressful, and I think will cause burnout. And I've coached people who have spoken up, and that act of speaking up has added to their stress massively, not detracted from it. And so are there other reasons why people just equated speaking up with less burnout? It doesn't make sense to me.
I think what you're raising, Rachel, is a very important point. It goes to something I'm not an expert in. I don't work in how people translate evidence into application. But I suppose where my understanding lies is in how we can misunderstand or misconstrue evidence in order to develop interventions and policies. So Amy Edmondson, with her work on psychological safety, raised a very important issue that, psychological resources where people feel they can fail, they can take risks, they can take time to learn, and mistakes are opportunities to learn, created a very interesting shift in how we started thinking about workplaces. We always knew that those things were important, but I think this was very impactful work that got very quickly adopted, and obviously abundance of research linking psychological safety to positive psychological outcomes. But that kind of research only tells us the associations, that kind of research only tells us people who feel psychologically safe at work are less likely to report higher levels of burnout. That type of research does not tell us what we need to do, what needs to be changed. We need different type of research to do those things. So the evidence is there that indeed those who feel more psychologically safe have benefits, and they believe that they work in more safe environments in terms of patient safety and quality of care. The evidence is not there that psychological safety always leads to better objective patient safety outcomes, for example. We don't have that evidence. So any documentation that says we improve patient safety outcomes by increasing psychological safety, no, we improve people's beliefs about patient safety.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. That's really interesting, because the other thing I'm just thinking is that, again, it seems that there would be a link between sort of long-term reducing burnout and speaking up. I guess in my head, I'm thinking, well, it's stressful to speak up, but once you've done it and you've spoken up to somebody who can change things, and then things change in the long term because you've spoken up, patients are kept safer, which reduces our stress, the workplace changes, which reduces our stress. So long term, the effects of speaking up may be a reduction in burnout, but short term, it's very uncomfortable. But then part of me is thinking, well, also long term, if maybe you speak to the wrong person, or you do speak to the right person and then nothing changes, then that increases your stress as well. So it's a total minefield, this, isn't it? In the ways that you do it, you can only do what you do, and how it's received, that's not under your control, and we can't change other people. And again, that's really stressful. So what have you found in your research?
Yeah, so I think you're raising a really important point about the long term and the short term, but we are finding that the constant act of engaging in withholding what you want to say, so the daily employee silence, and that's quite interesting, because it includes a lot of different instances and experiences. It could be related to, I think this week's work schedule and shifts are unfair, but I didn't say anything to my manager. I saw a more senior colleague making a medication error, but I didn't say anything because I was afraid. You can imagine loads of different experiences. So that daily engagement in withholding those genuine expressions, those thoughts, those evaluations, is very consistently linked to higher daily burnout. However, so far, it seems that the engaging into daily voice acts does not have that positive effect on burnout that we thought. So what you said, in that short term, there's no relief. It's not like if today I speak up 3 times, I'm going to go home feeling better. And at the moment, again, it's preliminary evidence, not the full data set, but at the moment, it seems like it could actually be adding to that daily strain. So you might actually go home feeling a bit worse. Now, the other interesting thing from that study, because it's a diary study and it's still ongoing, is that we also get something new, we get to see what are those daily things that people withhold or that people voice about. And if you kind of start looking at those entries, the things that people withhold are quite different than the things they are feeling comfortable speaking up about. So small suggestions to improve something that the person feels are not going to be perceived as very threatening or are not questioning the professionalism of their colleague, they're more likely to be voiced. Whereas the things that we hold back are more likely to be related to, patient safety issues or staffing issues or work-related issues. So there is also that sense in which very quickly we know what we are allowed to speak up about and what not.
That is fascinating. So what you're saying is that when it was maybe something about professional behaviour or there's like an error, people felt more able to speak up, because I'm interpreting it now, because it was something they could see, it was about somebody else, it was concrete, they could say, this is somebody else, they've done that, and they felt more able to speak up.
No, it's the other way around.
Okay.
It's the other way around. So it's when it's something that does not involve accusing another person of being unprofessional, or it's not going to jeopardize your relationships, or it's not going to stigmatize you as a troublemaker. That's where you're more likely to hold it back until a massive crisis point is reached, where, more and more mistakes happen and more people are endangered. And then we hear about, whistleblowers, or people start feeling they need to do something about it. Whereas things that are less threatening, which is like, oh, we're using green gloves, but I think green gloves, they're not the best. Maybe the blue are better.
Yeah.
This is a very simple example, but I'm just trying to show that it's a very resource consuming, strategic daily process until potentially we develop a set of rules where we know, okay, that's a no, don't touch that. And it's interesting that you can also get that from speaking to more senior healthcare workers as well, people with, managerial roles, people with leadership roles, where their reality is very, very clearly reflecting that we have big, serious political, financial problems to deal with. We don't have enough beds for patients. We don't have enough resources for this. We're on a very tight rope here. So we don't have time to deal with everything. We can't. So all those things are not really captured very well when we read about speaking up, and the oversimplification, speak up and everything is going to be better. Unfortunately, like psychological safety has been turned into a magic solution, but the actual ways this can work, we don't really know that. And that's really, really important to keep in mind, because I know a lot of people struggle and they feel that, they don't matter, or they don't know who to speak to, and they don't know how to speak to anyone. But the reality is nobody's really trained, nobody's really taught. I remember interviewing a junior doctor, and the person saying to me, I wouldn't know where to go in medical school and in training and induction. And when I came here, nobody told me what I should do if I want to raise something. So there's sort of a hidden curriculum there, a hidden agenda, isn't it? If we want people to speak up, shouldn't they all know what the exact pathways are? So that adds even more to the stress of speaking up. I want to say something, but I wouldn't know where to go. I wouldn't know where to start. I don't know what the procedure is. Is everything I say going to be recorded and used in a court case against me? We know of cases where people lost their jobs and lost court cases to the NHS because they spoke up and what they had to say could not be proven. So there's this sense that whatever I say can be used against me. So unless I'm very sure about where I'm going to go, who I'm going to speak to, and that the people who I'm going to ask to help me are actually going to have my back, isn't it a bit too much to ask and not prepare people properly for that as well. So there is a contradiction there between encouraging voice, but actually giving people the means, the knowledge, the opportunity, and the capability to be able to do that without suffering all the stress.
And that's a big conflict, isn't it? When you're seeing something that's affecting patients or affecting your colleagues and it feels wrong and you know you ought to speak up, but speaking up is so threatening personally because, you'll get labelled a troublemaker. You might damage that relationship with your boss, and that is really, really important. Or I've noticed doctors really hate feeling like they're being difficult. Even just raising a workload issue might mean they're being difficult or a snowflake or anything like that. But then you've got this moral imperative to protect things and to improve things. And that's a lot of cognitive dissonance. And you're right, we're constantly told to speak up, but we're not told how to do it. And then when we see that there are consequences for speaking up, like you said, people being ostracized by their colleagues or counter accusations going or court cases, it's incredibly difficult. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't in a lot of ways. What's the solution? What have you found actually works?
That's a really great question, Rachel. But I think in an oversimplified way, we could separate solutions into two sort of big categories. The solutions that are about me taking care of myself, and the solutions that are out of my hands and that we are hoping to see in the future that are going to reduce the burden on the individual. So what we can do is take better care of ourselves. We can give ourselves the opportunity to talk about things we hold back on a daily basis, even if it's just to feel better at the end of the day, even if it's just to be heard, even if it's just to make sense of what happened. This could be with a trusted colleague, this could be with a friend, with a family member, a spouse, this could be with a therapist, if this is something that people want to do. This could be even just writing. There's loads of evidence on how emotional writing helps a lot cope and manage with, difficult emotions. So I could be journaling, I could be writing, I could be talking, because we need to hear somebody telling us that, you did the best you could with what you had. And if you keep chasing up those things on a daily basis, you won't be able to do the other parts of your job, and the patients need you, and the world needs you. So the self-care part is not the solution to burnout, is not the solution to silence, is not the solution to well-being that comes from a workplace. But it is something we need to do. We need that self-compassion. We have loads of evidence that self-compassion helps. And understanding that you're doing the best you can is a very big part of it. It won't cure your burnout, because your burnout is not coming from you. It is coming from an overburdened system. It's coming from a place of work. It's a bit like, to use your metaphor with the frog in the boiling water. We often say take some time off work and look after yourself, but we take you out of the boiling water, we let you cool down, and then we just put you back there. So you're supposed to have found a way to not get burned anymore. That's not how it works. So the self-care part is to start giving ourselves better understanding and start giving ourselves self-compassion. This will help with the daily stress. This will help starting to see ourselves that our value and who we are and what we can do is not determined by the constraints of an overburdened work environment. And the other side of the solutions is sadly very, very slow and requires a lot of multidisciplinary collaborations, requires a lot of change, requires something that we can do very little about, requires potentially political changes. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do. Even managers can be more understanding, can be more supportive. Maybe, yes, we need better training for our managers. We need to help people because there's the other thing. You're a clinician. You're not trained to be a manager. You're not trained to be in that role. So that's quite unfair as well. You have to support a lot of people who are going through a lot of things without having those resources yourself. So it's like being a psychotherapist who's not been trained to be a psychotherapy. You don't you don't have the resources to protect yourself. So in terms of those daily emotional experiences and daily relationships, yes, we can help people communicate better. We can help managers support better their teams, but also themselves.
We're all part of the system, aren't we? That's the problem. And I 100% agree with you about the training the managers. Because actually, if you were a clinical leader, you've got a team, but the team come to you and somebody starts sort of whinging or telling about things that could be changed or whatever. If you were just trained not to take that defensive stand, to just be able to listen, and even if there's nothing you can do about it, to be empathetic and say, I understand where you're coming from. Thank you for sharing, and not have the relationship threatened, not have the other person feeling that they've been difficult by raising it. And, obviously we're not in charge of what other people feel, but we can do things to reassure people. So that's really important. So there is so much the system needs to do to change. And you're absolutely right. The frog in the boiling water, if you go off with burnout and then you go back into exactly the same situation without changing anything, then you're just going to get burnout on repeat. What I'm particularly interested in is the first half of what you were saying, because this podcast is about how we can change ourselves in order to be able to turn down the heat in that pan. And when you first got in touch with me, Olga, I was really interested in this thing about speaking up yourself to somebody else, not with a view to having to change the system, but with a view to getting it out of your own system and helping with self-compassion. Because, that's just another stick we can beat ourselves with, isn't it? That I haven't spoken up. I'm part of the system. I've seen this thing happen. And because I haven't spoken up, I'm as bad as the people committing the crime type thing. But, we know it's all shades of grey. And just to be clear, what I'm not saying is that we let, dreadful things go on without speaking up. I'm not saying that at all. But what we're talking about is all those little things we see all the time, the little things that we would like to change, but it's like, you can't change everything all the time. And you said to me that your research has shown that even just debriefing with a family member at the end of the day about the things that you haven't been able to speak up about, the things that you've been silent at work about, but even that can be really beneficial for you and your well-being. What examples do you have from your research about that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we know that mainly from qualitative evidence, from qualitative interviews and speaking to people when you try to understand in that very pressurized system. Okay, so what do you do to help yourself feel better? What is the thing that you sort of, how are you not drowning? Basically, how have you managed to go on for 20 or 25 years and you're not drowning? And it often comes back to self-compassion and readjusting those expectations from yourself, and the realization that you are just one person who can only change so little at every time. And I know it sounds quite oversimplified, but it is a habit, and the habit is the best mechanism we have at the moment to help change how people feel and to help people take better care of themselves. So it might not feel great the first time you do it. It might, in fact, feel a bit weird, and it might make you feel even more angry to start talking about it. You come from work, you've had a very difficult day, you saw 10 things that they weren't scandal worthy, but they you feel like they shouldn't be happening, right? And healthcare workers are people with what we call very high pathological altruism. They are people who will show up to work with high fever and awfully tired and unwell because they feel they need to keep going and they feel they need to keep helping people. So inevitably, when you see harm going, even if it's the smallest thing, it's going to make you feel awful. It kind of makes sense, but we need that reality check We need that realization that even in the best of work environments, with all the support, something will go wrong, something we won't be able to fix, something will happen. It is part of the nature of the job. It is part of healthcare. There's so much happening. So that dark side of being somebody who cares a lot means that we might overemphasize how much we can really do, and we start being unfair to ourselves. So this is where a little habit formation will, in the long term, start helping us see things differently. And we've got evidence from therapy as well, that the first times we try to do things differently, they don't often make sense. They might make us feel a bit worse. They might make us feel a bit more angry. But in the long term, I start to come home and I develop the habit of decompressing. I develop that habit of talking to my friend, talking to my partner, talking to somebody I feel comfortable and I trust. So when I come home, I can have that conversation. I can say, right, there were 10 things that today happened, and I really did my best. I know they're not life-threatening. I really wish I could do more, but that's all I can really do. And this just for the first few weeks, we might have to do it a little bit forced, and eventually it will start feeling better. Not that, as you said, we let things sleep and we don't care anymore, but this is a reality check. Like with everything in our life, we can't fix everything, we can't change everything. We need to choose our battles. And the second thing I can do is I can start thinking, is there anything small I can change in the way I work that can make me feel better? So for example, if I keep coming back and constantly my main thought is, I've got so much to speak up about, but I don't know where to go. Right, maybe the first step is to find out where I should go. Because it's not your fault you don't know. You should know from your training, from the system, from the people around you. But since you've discovered that, the first step would be to start finding out, okay, where should I go? What are my options? Because it's really unfair, isn't it, to try and force yourself to do something without having that knowledge of where to start from, where to go. So it could be to reach out to somebody who has spoken up before, look into what's available in terms of NHS support, something like the Speak Up Guardians, or even, reach out to people who do and write about it, who are researchers or academics or universities. The UK is great in that there's so much academic effort going on in supporting healthcare workers, and often we find that we know more than potentially more junior healthcare workers, and that's quite unfair. That somebody who's researching it, who's not living it, knows more about what to do than the person who's in there. That's quite unfair. So there's also this sense in which because then that allows us to make a bit better plan and say, okay, if I see this, then I could go and talk to that person. If that happens, then I could do that. So I start finding small things that I could start doing differently and see what helps me feel better.
And that, to me, is all about autonomy, isn't it? And control. So when you feel you've got some control, even if it's just right, okay, well, the one thing I can do is to find out next time where to go, what to do. That's giving back control. And if I was to come home and talk to someone, so I'm just thinking, well, if I come home and talk every night, like to my husband saying, right, these are 10 things that happened at work today, I'm not sure he's going to know what to do or say to make things better, because often he just wants to run in to fix it rather than just listen. So if I was the person being talked to about these things, if I was a partner or a friend, what sort of things should I do? What sort of questions could I ask that person? Or is it literally a question of just listening and repeating that whole mantra of you're just human, you've done your best, you've done what you could. Are there any particular questions that would be useful there?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question, Rachel. I think that just drawing a little bit on my training in therapy as well. The power of just listening is massive, isn't it? And we know that sometimes allowing somebody to say out loud something they've been thinking has a big transformative effect as well. So yes, primarily the person who's been talked to, we need to listen. We are not asked to fix anything, because if the person who works in that organization can't, somebody who is outside definitely can't do anything about it. However, we are in the position to ask people what they need to feel better. Because often, in the reality of work life is we often don't know what people around us go through at work. Not everybody talks about it. And we often think we realize, especially if, it's somebody who works in healthcare, we often think we realize how difficult it is. But let's be honest, unless we are there, we have no clue. And that includes me. I spend most of my time talking to healthcare workers. I've got no clue how it is to be in your shoes. So all I can do is listen and ask, what would you think would help you? And similarly goes to, all the friends or family members or partners. We want to listen. We can ask all the questions we want to help us understand what happened. That valuable sort of feedback on, sounds like you're already doing everything you can. And that's okay, because there's also shame with it, isn't it? If you go home and you say, I could have done more for this patient, but I didn't have the time or the resources or this or that. This comes with a lot of shame, and even feeling that the people around you, they understand that you've already, exceeded yourself. That has a huge relief. And then it's really about, what would help you feel better right now? What would help you feel better when you come home? What would help you feel better? It's just helping people figure out what would help them feel better. This is a much bigger conversation about, work-life balance and how we bring work at home, and it's a whole different thing. But for those who have that opportunity and that luxury, I think it's really important that the ones who are on the side of listening, we don't want to urge them to do more. We don't want to help them figure out ways to become better at their job, because they're already as good as it gets. We have to help them take better care of themselves, listen, and take away that shame that comes with taking responsibility for a failing that is not yours, for a failing that is part of the system.
I love that. With that whole self-compassion thing, I often, do try to put my hand on my heart and say to myself, you've done your best in really difficult circumstances, and actually anybody would have responded like you did. Look what you're coping with, and I guess that applies just as much to the fact that you didn't speak up when you thought, about the million different things you could have spoken up about. And Olga, if there isn't somebody there every day for you after work, and with the best word in the world, even if there is, it's, I can't imagine them, 5-6 days a week having a half an hour conversation with you about this. I love the idea of journaling. What journal prompts would you use?
It really, I think with journaling, we need to find what works best for each one of us. Some people love a bit more structure in their journal. Some people like, there's lots of, journals out there as well, like gratitude journals, or, lots of ideas. So it's about finding what we like. If we like the structured style, then starting from, today, what were the things that happened that made me upset, right? How did they make me feel? Was there anything I could do differently? And then something about, self-compassion and accepting that I did everything I could. So maybe I could have done something qualitatively differently, but not have done more, even if it's just, questioning that assumption. I didn't need to do more. I could have done this differently. So again, it goes back to the implementation intentions. If I find myself in this situation again, then I should try to do this. And this might change because I might try to do something new and it won't work again. And I might have to try something else. But this is if I want to have a little bit more structure, so I could write about what happened, how did this make me feel, what I did, and if I find myself in this situation again, what do I want to do? It couldn't be keeping to do the same thing. I can also do expressive emotional writing. I can also just start writing about my day. Again, it doesn't have to be every day. It's only when I feel I really want to do it. So I could sit down and just start writing about how did this day make me feel? What did it make me think about? There is a lot of sense making to be made through those negative experiences, and if we just try to suppress them, they're only going to build up under that same narrative of I'm not good enough, I'm not effective enough, I suck basically, and I should be doing better. So this kind of free expressive writing, this kind of journaling allows us to take control of that narrative that we're shaping every day about work. And through that again we get moments of clarity. Through that again you could think, oh, maybe I could have, maybe next time I should talk to that person because they've been involved in this as well. Maybe they have an idea. And of course there's also the whole creative writing. So you could take that to a whole different level and you can start writing a story. You can use storytelling. You can approach these as somebody else's story, somebody who's gone to work and had to deal with these, and you can start thinking what else they could have done. You can create a different ending very often. You can rewrite the scenario. So there's many different ways that we can write and journal, depending on what suits us best, depending on what helps us the most. But it helps control and think about the narrative rather than just, put it back in that box that says, I failed again. And that then becomes huge, and then that becomes my label, and then I get angry, and then I just, I either become very, very unhappy, or I decide to leave because I've decided I can't do better.
How much do you think over responsibility plays into this? Or I should have spoken up here, 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 and here. Do you think healthcare professionals do feel incredibly responsible for speaking up about stuff they have absolutely no control about, or that they should have done something when actually they definitely couldn't have done something? Does that play into this too?
Yeah, I think if we start thinking about, who are the people most likely to work in healthcare, who are the people most likely to become nurses or doctors, and we start thinking about education and high school and all that time, we find that these are the most conscientious people are usually choosing a career that sadly has become a system that takes advantage of that conscientiousness. So in many ways, it's the perfect material, isn't it? We know that these will be people who will keep trying their best and will take as much responsibility as you can. For me, it's like unimaginable that, you take responsibility for people's lives every day. Like I often joke with, my husband or with my family that I don't have a real job. I write things, I talk to people and I write things. These are real jobs because you have to go every day. You're a surgeon or you're a nurse, you do things that you're taking responsibility for my life. So that alone is massive, right? I mean, I appreciate, they enjoy, this is their dream and this is what they want to do. But by definition, it's a job of over responsibility. It's a job where the slightest, like if I sneeze while I'm teaching, nothing's going to happen. But the surgeon can't just sneeze while they're doing an operation. Like it's a whole it's a whole different thing. So it's a job of over a profession of over responsibility from the start of it. And then add on top of that a training system that constantly reminds you that you have to be on top of your game all the time and you have to be amazing all the time and there's no margin for error. And if you get something wrong, it's your fault. And then on top of that, you enter a work environment with usually no proper induction, no proper adjustment period. And again, all the decisions for your future are made based on how on top of your game you are all the time. So are you going to sleep to feel better, or are you going to keep reading and find that solution to that problem that nobody can solve? Are you going to try to see more patients because that's what the projection you're dealing with is? So at no point in all that trajectory we see self-compassion, self-care, support, understanding, human nature. It never comes up. So you have people who are naturally prone to being overly responsible, being trained in a system that rewards and values over performance, and presenteeism and constantly being on the top of the game, into a system that basically depends on you doing 200% of your job, because otherwise you feel it's going to collapse. So it's reinforcing all that, isn't it? And then on top of that, if you see anything wrong, it's also your responsibility to report it and fix it. And that's unfair.
Gosh. I mean, when you put it like that, no wonder everyone's burning out. And that's such an eloquent description of genuinely what happens.
But I think I don't work in healthcare, so I'm not trying to say it's an awful place to work in. That's really, really important. What all I'm trying to say is what we hear, that the emotional experience, the emotional trajectory is that brings people to either feeling I've had enough, I'm going to leave, or I've had enough, I don't care anymore, and I'm going to do the minimum expected, or leads to, all those scandals and those are problems that we read. This is not because they don't care or they're bad people. It's because the emotional demands are just piling up over and over in what makes it look like a very negative place to be.
I love what you're doing is thinking, actually, you can't speak up about everything because it's literally not possible. It's like I think you can't ever get to the end of your to-do list in healthcare. It's literally not possible. It's very difficult to meet every single patient demand and need that's going on. Therefore, you have to pick your battles. Obviously, the stuff that's really important, that's causing severe patient harm or staff harm, those issues do need raising, but they'll be, like you said, 8, 10 a day that you notice that you could speak up about. But even if there is something you can do, you can't do everything. You're human. You've got a finite capacity. So I love what you're talking about with actually, how do you then mitigate that? How do you then not get massive moral injury from not being able to be omnipresent and do everything? And just talking or journaling is a pretty simple solution that most of us can do. And the other thing I was wondering, where's the role of the peer groups and talking to your colleagues in all of this?
That's quite interesting, Rachel. So we wrote a paper about a year or 2 years ago where we're just thinking about informal communication in the workplace. So that includes talking to your peers, having those chats, that includes gossip, and anything you can imagine. And again, there the evidence is quite mixed. So if you are a lucky one that can find a group of peers where you share values and you have that psychological safety to be open about things, then that's great. It can help mentoring with senior, colleagues who have been through similar situations. Yes, that's great. But at the same time, because of the way the healthcare, professions can be structured, and especially in the early years, it's quite competitive, isn't it? Not everyone is lucky enough to find that kind of peer group that definitely helps. So sometimes we can end up having, negative effects if there is not the right kind of support from our peers. So that's really important to keep in mind. Just trying to develop as many, peer groups you can. It's not really always going to work. So there's cases where feeling too relaxed and too sort of, safe with your peers can actually start having the opposite effect. So we see that it affects people's sense of efficacy. It actually makes people feel less competent and efficient, because you start going down that route where you spend most of your day complaining about your job, and that starts make you feel worse. So there's an interesting balance to be had there. I think to the extent to which our peers can give us empathy, because they are going through similar things, we can talk about solutions, we can talk about ideas and dealing with stuff. We can have some genuine, almost like support groups. This is really great. But we need to remember, as social animals as we are, emotional states are very contagious. Burnout is contagious. So you can get burnt out very quickly by simply starting to work in a place where everyone's burnt out. So if we spend a lot of time with people who are really deflated emotionally, we also risk shifting the way we feel about ourselves and our jobs even further. So I think it's about finding those peers that make us feel safe to express how we feel about our jobs, but who are also helping us feel energized and helping us, feel better. So maybe we don't need to talk about it all the time. Maybe we need to go, I don't know, to have some a sport thing we do together. We can all go play tennis and hit those balls and feel better. So it's finding those activities, finding those things we can do. Maybe not talk about work at all with our peers, and just being with people who know what we're going through is going to help. So it's quite an interesting one. With peer support as well. And the other issue we have in healthcare, of course, also is that people are not always open to talking about what they're going through. Self-medication with alcohol or drugs or mental health problems. People don't talk about those to their colleagues. People don't talk about to their peers because they're afraid that, I don't know, in a moment of weakness or an error, this is going to be used sort of against them. So there's this other issue of, how honest can I be with my colleagues, how much I can say, how open I can be. And that's where I think often talking to people outside or entering anonymous peer groups might actually be a bit helpful until we're at the point where we're more ready to accept healthcare workers as, human beings with needs and weaknesses and in need of support and help. Like depression, anxiety are really, really high, but I don't know how many colleagues talk about that.
It's huge. It is really huge. So what you're saying about the peer groups, they can be helpful, I guess, because you have a little bit more empathy because you know the situation people are in. But, and I've experienced this, some peer groups can get a bit competitive. I remember going to a GP group and actually I came away feeling much worse because I'd share something and then I get told what to do. And I'm like, I hadn't done that. It made me feel worse. So, or we try and fix it, or because we're sort of in the same sort of situation, we know exactly what that person should do, even if they're in a different one. So they could be helpful and unhelpful. So
exactly, it takes a bit of time to find out what we need, and it might be that what we need changes over time as well. So first, we need this peer group, and then we need something else. So we have to be open and sort of attuned to what we need and how we feel, and accept that not every advice or every interaction should be adopted or should be helpful, or people are telling you what they did, how they coped. And you can also think, okay, do I like the way this person is behaving? Is their coping actually working? Like, we have the right to sort of question advice.
That's why I do love coaching and therapy as well, because a good coach, a good therapist is asking you what you're thinking, feeling. They are being very empathetic towards you and with unconditional positive regard, but they're not trying to fix or give solutions. You're coming up with the solutions. So I think if you can find a good coach or a good therapist, that's great. And there are certainly a lot of free coaching that's available and therapy available to NHS employees and doctors and other people in healthcare, even if you don't work in the NHS, but they're often just underutilized, totally underutilized. And I know that it's often a time issue or people even don't know about it, but honestly, coaching has been one of the things that's changed my life and has been brilliant.
Yeah, it's also that little bit of stigma, that if I go to a therapist or a coach, it means I'm admitting I need help. And if I need help, I'm admitting I failed. And so there's all that, need to regain control of the narrative that needing support or needing help is not failure. It's a sign that I need to go to the next level, basically.
I mean, it's mad, isn't it? I have a tennis coach to make me better at tennis. Why wouldn't we get a coach to make us better at our job?
Exactly.
A lot of our listeners, they're in the role of people who are seeing loads of things that they feel they need to speak up about, but they can't, there's silence. But also they are clinical leaders and they are in roles where people might be coming to them and speaking up. And they're being spoken up to as a person who can potentially change things. But a lot of the time they can't change things. And so you've got that sort of double whammy of, well, someone has trusted me, they've spoken up to me. And you might be feeling upset because you might feel you've failed because that person's not happy about something. They might be speaking up to you about your behavior, or they might be speaking up to you about something in the system that they think something should be done or you should change it. And you absolutely can't. Have you got any tips for if you're that person in the middle?
Yeah, again, it's a disclaimer. My advice comes from my academic and research background. I've not been a clinical leader. I don't know how it feels to be in that situation. I don't know what's right or wrong. But there's a few things we can do to buy ourselves time. Also, the same also things apply if you're a clinical manager and there's loads of people that you have to support. You have to accept you can't help everyone. That's like the reality, and especially in such a strained environment with those resources and all the pressure that clinical leaders have to deal with to keep up numbers, to I don't know, keep governments happy or boards happy. So there's the same self-compassion and self-understanding applies. So when this happens, we don't want our first thought to be, gosh, I need to solve this too. No, I need to buy myself some time and see if this is something I can actually do something about. So don't rush into giving a response to anyone. Somebody comes with a suggestion, a concern, a problem, even if it sounds something that needed to be sorted yesterday and it's really, really serious. Don't make any promises you cannot keep. Don't say, oh, we're going to sort that. Oh, I know what I'm going to do. The need to show that we have a solution and an answer. We don't want that. That's adding to your pressure, creating unrealistic expectations from your team. And then you tied yourself into knots to solve problems that, you maybe didn't even know existed in the first place. So buy yourself some time and give a realistic expectation to the person coming to you. You can say something like, I'll look into this. Let's book some time to discuss it in the next couple of days. Just help them feel heard, but don't commit yourself to something that you haven't had enough time to understand yet. And by that already, you will have bought yourself some time to really think about, is this something I can actually do something about? If this is something I can do something about, and it's not going to take me a lot of time, and it's not going to take me a lot of effort, then okay, I could address it quite soon. Now, if this is something I definitely can't do anything about, I need to find a way to communicate that to my team. I need to find a way to say to the person that, I hear you, I agree, this is a massive problem. But this is a red tape, this is a policy, this is a rule. There's very little I can do about it. Maybe there's something you can redirect people to. You can tell them, I'm not the right person to talk about it. You should go there. So that need to solve everything is what gets us often in a very difficult situation. And we end up making promises we cannot keep. So take that time to think, is this something I can do something about? Okay, if yes, when do I think it's realistic for me to look at it? Make that arrangement that is realistic, that doesn't create over expectations. And if it's something you definitely can't do anything about, do not try and convince yourself or everybody else that you have to find a way around it. At some point, the system needs to take responsibility. So if this is something you need to raise with somebody else, raise it with somebody else. Somebody told me once that one of the big problems in the NHS was that taking time to think is not something people, talk a lot about. And at the same time, though, their experience at a very senior surgeon and with loads of clinical and training and managerial experience as well. And in their experience, that was the most magical thing, was the finding the time to think. But he was saying that we don't value that. So let's try to create those little, opportunities of taking a few times to think about is this something I can help you with, and what's the best time to sort of talk about it. If you feel like you're running around putting out fires, it's not sustainable.
Olga, if you were that person, or if you were talking to that person who's documented 8 instances of silence when they thought they should speak up, what would your top 3 tips for them be right now?
I don't know. I think the first one would be to lie down and take a big breath. And for, I don't know, a few minutes, just really try to ground yourself in the here and now and push those thoughts away with all, your strength and power. Take a break from that, because I know it goes on in your head all the time. So it's a bit like, we do loads of positive imagery in psychotherapy or muscle relaxation techniques. So the first thing would be, you can't think clearly about something unless you stop thinking about it for a while. So first of all, lie down, clear your head. The second thing is, from those 8 things, was there any of them that really, really emotionally stayed with you during the day? And if yes, just please talk about it. Tell me about it. Let's try to make sense out of it. And then the third one would be, 8 times is a lot. Is there anybody you need to be talking about it in your team, in your organization? Because that sounds like a lot. And are all those 8 things part of your job description? Are all those 8 things part of your responsibility? So it'd be, just first of all, take a break and relax. Let's clear our heads. Now let's look back. Were all those 8 things equally important to you? Or was there something in there that's actually, emotionally hurt you more? And is there something we can do about it? So maybe they're not 8 things tomorrow. And less, that would be it. Yeah.
Great. Olga, this has just been so fascinating. If someone wants to find out more about your research and get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Yes, thank you. So I am based in the School of Psychology at the University of Leeds. So if you Google my name, Olga Lainidi, and University of Leeds, you're probably going to be redirected to my profile. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Olga Lainidi, and I'd be happy to answer questions, share any further insights. I'd love people to take part in my research. It's still ongoing. The diary study, we are close to finishing it, but we need about 30 more participants to have to complete the sample that we need. So if anybody would like to take part in the diary study, as I said, it's quite innovative. It's not happened before in that format. The feedback from people who've participated already has been really, really positive on how helpful it is to actually realize what you're going under. And you'll be helping inform a different type of research, looking into how it feels daily to be you, rather than assuming that we know what works best for you.
Brilliant. And we'd love you to come back, Olga, once your study is finished and you've got some more findings, come and talk to us about it again. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been totally fascinating.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Rachel.